Welcome to Bookends, the program for people who like to read. I'm going to be talking about some great reads for the summer months. I'm sure you'll have lots of time and lots of leisure time to enjoy books. My name is Sue Ellen Jones, and I'm the Teen Services Librarian at the Fort Collins Public Library. And I'd like to share some of the books I've been reading recently, and I hope you'll enjoy them. The first one that I'm going to talk about today is called John Lennon, All I Want Is the Truth. This is a photographic biography by a woman named Elizabeth Partridge. In 1965, I bought my very first Beatle record. I was in 6th grade. Everybody I knew brought their transistor radios to school, and at recess we all went out on the playground and we tuned in to the local radio station that played the latest Beatles hits. I remembered that I'm a Loser was particularly popular that year. My girlfriends and I loved to discuss the latest Beatles gossip. Most of us had a favorite Beatle. Mine was Paul. My best friend's favorite was George. It seems to me as though every generation rediscovers the Beatles, and they fall in love with their music and with them all over again. This is a wonderful photobiography about one of the most controversial of the Beatles, John Lennon. And it covers both the things that he did wonderfully well, his creativity, as well as some of the harsher facets of his personality. Now, John had a very difficult childhood. His mother was a woman who wasn't around very much. She was sort of a holiday parent, and John loved her very much, but she seemed incapable of taking care of him on a daily basis. And so when he was very young, he was sent to live with an aunt of his Aunt Mimi. Now, his Aunt Mimi would never have made it in the fortune teller business because she predicted that John, who was very creative, would never be able to make a living playing the guitar, even though that was his hobby. She said nobody can make a living from music. But of course, John proved her wrong. From a very young age, he was rebellious and he used his fists to get himself out of trouble. Elizabeth Partridge spends a lot of the time in this book looking at the music and how quickly the Beatles became popular. She fills it with wonderful black and white photographs of many of the most important times in John Lennon's life. And she talks about how rock and roll really helped release some of John's creativity, as well as exploring some of the problems. She talks about the breakup of the Beatles after their relentlessly horrible paced road schedule, and she talks about the death of John Lennon and the impact on the worldwide scene on music. Please do try reading John Lennon, All I Want Is the Truth by Elizabeth Partridge. Now, my next book that I'm going to talk about is called Inexcusable by Chris Lynch. And I have to say that this book is probably one of the most troubling books that I think I have ever read, because I think the main character is someone that I wouldn't really want to know. And in fact, I don't think I'd even like him very much, because the book starts out this way. The way it looks is not the way it is. That's what the book's main character, high school senior Keir Sarafian, says. And he says it about almost every facet of his life. Keir may not know much, he thinks, but he's sure that he knows himself. And the one thing that he knows about himself is that he is a good guy. He is a loving, devoted son and brother. He's a loyal friend and a reliable teammate. Most important of all, he is a guy who understands limits. For instance, he understands that when a girl says no, that she means no. But that's not what his friend, Gigi, says to him one night after they go out. In fact, what Gigi says he has done seems impossible to Keir. It's something inexcusable, the worst possible thing he can imagine, the very opposite of everything he wants to be. Most important of all, Keir likes to be liked. He would never do anything, of course, to hurt anyone intentionally, or would he? When he tackles and cripples a member of an opposing football team on a routine play, officials rule it an accident, even though this same act earns him scholarship offers and a new nickname, Killer. When he and his buddies rampage through town destroying personal property and wrecking the town's statue, Keir dismisses it as a silly prank. When he drinks too much at parties, he dismisses it as recreation. And on the night he goes out with Gigi, and she tells him that he has raped her, he doesn't believe her because Keir convinces himself that the way it looks is not the way it is. Inexcusable by Chris Lynch. Now, everybody has certain books that they think that should be made into movies, and this is one of mine. It's called The Extraordinary Adventures of Alfred Kropp by Ricky Yancey. It all got started because Alfred Kropp's Uncle Farrell wanted to be rich. Uncle Farrell had never had enough money growing up, and by the time Mr. Arthur Meyer comes along with his once-in-a-lifetime deal, Uncle Farrell is 40 years old and he's very, very tired of being poor. Being poor was not one of those things that you ever get used to, even if being poor is all you've ever been. So when Mr. Myers flashed the cash at Uncle Farrell, all other considerations, like for instance if it was legal, were all forgotten. Now Alfred Kropp is Uncle Farrell's nephew, and he hit 6 feet tall and 200 pounds when he was 10 years old. After that, he gives up weighing and measuring himself. But at age 15, the astonishingly tall Alfred Kropp is plunged into a world of adventure when he agrees to help his uncle filch an ancient sword from the office of his CEO, a building for which his uncle is the security guard. Now, this CEO just happens to be a descendant of the Knights of the Round Table, and the sword happens to be none other than Excalibur. And the guy that Alfred has swiped the sword for is a knight gone bad who plans to use the sword's magic power to take over the world. Then enter Bernaccio, who just happens to be another descendant of a Round Table knight, and he takes Alfred on his wing on a quest to retrieve the sword and use it for good. This book is chock full of action, car chases. You would not believe the different vehicles that happen in here. And reading this book is just like watching a movie in your head.